Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the Operational Reset Podcast. As always, this podcast is brought to you by Tactical Resilience. This is my tactical resilience building workshop and program. At the heart of it is the Operational Reset Stack method. This is where you are intentionally addressing that stress response, which is going to hijack the skill that you develop in weapons tactics, combatives, in communication. That stressor attacks those skills, and you can do something about it by using ORSM in those moments. And so I'm super excited to welcome my guest here. But if you're interested in ORSM and learning more, go to joeswansontactical.com and you can tap in with the online program there, or just reach out to me on Instagram, Joe Swanson Tactical, and we can start that conversation. But my guest is a guy that I've gotten to know a little bit, works for a local agency, and brought in tactical resilience to his agency. And we've had some great conversations about leadership. Welcome to the show, Division Chief Michael McIntosh.
Yeah, Joe, thanks for having me. And I've really appreciated being able to get to know you over our initial conversation, and then just through our interaction since that initial conversation. And it's been good. It's been good to kind of, they say that iron sharpens iron, and it's good just to rub elbows together and kind of talk about where we're at, because a lot of the things that we're doing is in the same space.
Yeah, absolutely. I love, you've led, and I want to dig into your story, but just to give people context, you've led at the very highest level as a sheriff for a county in Colorado. So you've led leadership, you've led law enforcement at the top, and you've come from the street level and moved up there. And so I think it's really impactful to talk to somebody like you that's open about those experiences and your opinion. You also have a podcast that you and your wife do, and you talk about this stuff. And I think for me, it's been super useful, and I think for other people to hear it, it is useful as well. Talk a little bit about the inception of, the law enforcement dream, and how'd you get into it? How'd you hear about it? What led to you wanting to get into law enforcement?
It's kind of a interesting story in that I never had my sights set on that. As I was growing up and in my high school years, I really didn't even know what I wanted to do. When I got out of high school, I was kind of one of those that I would have jobs. A lot of those jobs were out in the elements. I did a lot of construction before I got into law enforcement, and I also had an opportunity to work on a couple of sod farms. So just some different varieties of types of jobs. But I ended up joining the Navy, and I did a tour in the Navy. And as I reflect back, when I was in the Navy, that's where I really started to develop that sense of how critical leadership is. And when it really hit me was when we were in the middle of the ocean on what folks look at as this huge ship, and it is a huge ship, an aircraft carrier, but when it's in the middle of the ocean, it's this tiny little dot that's out there, and there's a lot of activity that goes on this really small piece of equipment. When you think about the fact that there's 5,000 men at the time, there were no women on the ship, and then all of the aircraft that are attached to it. So it's a little floating city out there in the middle of the ocean. And if you have poor leadership, those mistakes, especially on the flight deck, could be catastrophic. And you really started to understand it and learn how important leadership was and how important communication was. And so when I got done with that tour and I came home, I ended up reaching back out to a couple of high school buddies that were living in Brighton, where I was living before, and moved in. We had a little bachelor pad there, the four of us, and one of the guys was working at the Adams County Sheriff's Office at the time. And I was really struggling because I got back into construction, but that sense of purpose, that sense of why, it just wasn't there. I loved building houses. I loved seeing that to completion, but it wasn't fulfilling that that drive that I had, like I had when I was in the Navy, being a part of that team and just kind of the purpose behind what it was that we were doing.
Can
And
I
so I
ask
started
you?
talking. Go
Can
ahead.
I ask you a little bit? I want to just circle back on those experiences on that aircraft carrier. You know, I have a connection to aircraft carriers. My grandfather flew F4U Corsairs off of aircraft carriers in World
Okay.
War II, and so I've had a great experience talking to him about some of his experiences on them. What were some of those things that you saw in leadership, good or bad, in those moments of being on that little floating city?
Yeah, I I was working for an F-14 squadron. So for the F-14 Tomcat, and I was an aviation ordnanceman. So there's an inherent danger handling ordnance, especially when it becomes live ordnance. When you go through training, it's all inert, and that's all we flew until we were deployed. And then we started flying live ordnance, and the stakes get real at that point, right? And I was part of what they called the arm de-arm team, and that was the last thing that would happen to an aircraft before it's shot off. And the first thing that happens when it comes back is you're making sure that those weapons are in the position that's needed. So like before we shoot the bird off, you arm everything. You pull all of the pins, all of the safety pins that are in it. And then as soon as it hits the deck and they move it out of the runway area, then you're putting all of those safety mechanisms back in it. The landing, the launching, those are the most dangerous times on an aircraft carrier. Everything surrounding that. You really have to have your head on a swivel, and you have to really rely on your team members that, one, they know what their job is, and two, that they do their job, because if they don't, then bad things can happen. And that's where I really started to see how important that leadership and that kind of some of those skills that they taught you in boot camp, where sometimes you just don't ask questions, you just do what you're told to do immediately. Because if somebody tells you you need to move, if you turn around to find out why you need to move, it may be too late, right? So
Wow.
it,
Yeah.
it's one of those. It was one of those times very early on, right? Because I'm just a 20-year-old kid at the time. Um, that's when I started to really understand and realize the impact that good leadership could have. And then I saw some very poor leadership, and those were more what was happening internally we'd call it a shop, the aviation ordnance shop. There was a senior chief that ran our shop, and there were different ranks of people, and you got to kind of see different leadership types throughout that entire shop, and the different rank structures and what the roles and responsibilities are. And there were men there that I loved working for, and there were men there that you just scratch your head and you wonder why are you even here? It's so, and not
That's fun. Right.
I
I
was
think
going to say not unlike everything we get into, right?
right. I think that's common to where you have a variety and you have to take the good with the bad oftentimes. And what comes to mind is this like I've read Jocko Willink's book, Extreme Ownership. Leif Babin co-wrote that book, and they talk about decentralized command, where you're not waiting for that commander to tell you what to do. You are in your own environment on that deck. You are handling business and taking ownership of what you can take ownership of. And I would imagine that's the type of you have to have those people watching your back. Hey, move. Okay, I got to move. But you're responsible for these particular actions, and you can't be waiting around to say, "Hey, what do I do here again?"
Right.
No, you got to take it and get after it.
Yeah.
It's super fascinating because you have, like you said, it's almost like an ecosystem. It's its own little city. It's its own little mechanism that's functioning, and you probably see really easily the problems there. This is not unlike a law enforcement department, right?
Right. Yeah. It's the parallels are, kind of fascinating at times as to how similar they are. The only difference, in a lot of aspects is you didn't, I don't live with my coworkers 24 hours a day for a 6 month period like I did when we were on deployment, right? I mean, there was no getting away from these folks. We are all on this ship. Each squadron had its own berthing. If you were working nights, you were in this berthing. If you were working days, you were in this berthing. So you ate together, you slept in the same berthing, you worked together. So you see a lot of different human dynamics. You see the real people, when you spend that much time together. Um,
Yeah.
and, and those traits, those characteristics, that leadership, of those folks that have good leadership or good characteristics and those that don't, they really start to stand out.
Yeah. So you come out of that, you're back at home, you got the bachelor pad, four guys living together, young 20s, and one of your buddies you said worked for Adams County. Was he a
Yeah,
deputy there or in
yeah,
the
he was a deputy sheriff, in the jail at the time, and so I really didn't know a whole lot about how the system worked, um, and even what a deputy at a jail would do. And
right.
so I asked him, what do you do all day? And, what does this look like? And so we started talking, and at one point I just said, hey, I really have this sense that I want to get into some type of an organization that really values team, that it's kind of a team driven career, where I'm working alongside of other men and women that want to kind of accomplish some of the same goals and accomplish the same task. And so he ended up getting me an application, and I went through the process, and it was probably, at that time it was a year process really to get into law enforcement. You go take the test in a huge building. There was hundreds of people that were taking the test, and getting through that process and the background, and all of that, which most of your listeners and you are very well aware of when it comes to what that background process looks like. But
Yeah, it was
uh,
heavy duty. I mean, mine
oh,
was about 8 to 10 months to get in with the CHP, and 30 page background packet, the last 5 years of your life just sort of unpacked. And um, what did that guy tell you? Like when you said, "Hey, what do you do all day?" Like, what do you remember? Like, kind of how he described it?
well, I didn't even know who would be in a jail. I didn't understand the difference between a jail and a prison, and so he really kind of walked down that path. What the role of the county jail was, and the pretrial aspect of it, and you'll have the worst of the worst. The folks that got arrested last night, they go into the county jail, whether it was for homicide, DUI, or theft. They're all arrested and taken to the county jail, and they go through the court process. So he started to tell me what that looked like. At the time, this is in late 87. I got hired in early January of 88. Adams County Detention Facility, the one that's there now, was opened in 1986. And when it opened, it went from the old building that would probably hold 150 inmates to now a building that single bunked would hold over 500 inmates. So it was huge, and they needed a lot of staff to staff that. It immediately, the sheriff's office doubled in size just so that they could run that facility. So I kind of got in at a good time, and they were really trying to change the role of what they used to call a jailer to a deputy that was working in a detention role. So that was the vision of the sheriff then, is to get out of that jailer mentality and go to a deputy sheriff, so that a deputy sheriff could go from the jail to patrol to investigations. Because before, you would go in and you were kind of pigeonholed into that jailer role, and you really didn't move out of that. So when they would hire jailers, and they would hire deputy sheriffs to go work patrol and eventually be investigators. So that conversation that he and I had, that whole sense of team and purpose started to run through my veins again, right? That rush that you get, that adrenaline rush that you get. It's like, oh, okay, this is sounding like something that is right up.
Yeah. When you got in there, you go through this process. It's a year long. You finally get in there. What was, as a young 20-year-old, what was it like for you to get into that experience? And like you said, to your point, you have some of the worst of the worst, and some people that just had a bad night, you know?
I can tell you that I learned a lot in a very short period of time. I was fairly naive to some of the things that go on in our communities, as a lot of people are, and I'm grateful for that. Right, I'm grateful that most people have no clue about the evil things that people do to each other, and some of the things that we end up dealing with and seeing on a nightly basis. I was at first floored, just blown away by the fact that when I worked on the jail floor, I was going to be in with those people that we just talked about, right? And when I would work a pod, there would be 30 men that would be, in that area, that are not handcuffed, they're not shackled, they're just walking around, and I'm one deputy walking in there to deal with an incident or a situation that might be going on inside that pod that I need to deal with. I've got a tower deputy that's watching what I'm doing, and can call for help if I need help. But that was kind of intimidating when I first got in there and started to realize that all of those, I'd go out to the range and I'd practice, and well, you take all of that off before you go into the jail, right? I mean, you're walking around, and we had an ASP, we had OC, and that was about it,
Yeah.
and handcuffs.
Did that spark something in you to get more training, or to just think more about having to go hands on with somebody, combatives training, ways to control someone?
Absolutely. never had taken jujitsu or, any type of combative training until I got into law enforcement. And then being in that environment, it's like you need to be able to hold your own until others can get there to help you. And in the other thing that I realized very, very quickly that I need to understand how to communicate and how to read people if they're starting to get agitated, so that I'm careful about what I say and what actions I take based upon what I'm reading from a person. So it is an incredible learning environment because you're in that and you have the opportunity to read people on a daily basis that are not in a situation that they want to be in, right? No, nobody wants to be in jail. And so, you already have that stacked against you. And for some of those folks, and quite honestly, just of a side note, I would much rather work when I was working in the jail and on the jail floor, I'd much rather work with those that were in the maximum side of the facility as opposed to the minimum side. Because the ones that were on the maximum side knew that they were there, knew that they were going to be there for quite some time, and knew that they had committed a serious crime. And most of them had been involved in the system for quite some time. So, so they got it. I mean, there were some aspects that they taught me, right?
Sure.
And then you deal with that person who was arrested on a DUI last night. This was the first time they've ever been in jail. They're scared to death. They don't know what to expect. And they are very, very needy. That there's what is my bond? What time can I, can I call? When do I get fit? When do I, those that have been in the system, that they knew the drill. They didn't, they were nowhere near as needy as those that were on the minimum side of the facility.
It's so interesting to think about like developing those skills. I mean, it's one of the reasons that, you know, I came up with this system that we've talked about and that you brought down to Douglas County for me to teach ORSM is to access, because stress load builds, right? I mean, it builds, and especially in those situations where there's not a lot of time to reset it. And if somebody can do something to manage that stress load and regulate the nervous system to be able to access more emotional intelligence, be able to access better communication, better decision quality. Like in those moments that you're talking about right here, it's so crucial to have the awareness not only of oneself but of of what's around us, right? It's huge. I'm teaching at a Department of Corrections at a at a neighboring state here in July, and I'm excited to bring this into that environment for
Yeah.
them because they're time restrained. You know, having worked in the jail, you're time restrained. You can't oftentimes, can't close your eyes to reset. You can't do some of these things. You have to be aware at all times, increasing your awareness at all times, which
Yeah.
is, some of the stacks are you're able to do that, increase awareness while regulate that nervous system flexibility. So, what was it as you started developing those skills? What was it like for you did you have an inclination to kind of keep going so that you could help others with that experience? What was sort of the spark that led to sort of more of that leadership quality coming out in yourself?
Yeah. It really drove my development and my desire to continually develop myself and my skill sets, not just my tactical skill sets or my arrest control skill sets, but all of them, right? Even that emotional intelligence that we talk about, and then getting into wanting now to start training others.
Yeah.
So being that FTO
Mm,
inside that detention facility, so that when new deputies came in, could teach them what they needed to know, first and foremost to get through the day, but then be able to start to really refine those skills so that they became very proficient at their job. At the time that I was in there, um, and that sheriff had a requirement that you had to work for 2 years in the detention facility before you could ask for a transfer to another division. One of the things that ended up happening is I had worked in all of the different pods and in all of the different modules, and then I started working in the booking area and working in the booking area and dealing with all of the agencies that were bringing
mm.
um, their in custodies into our facility. That's when I started to get that spark for, when I want to test to go to patrol and get out on the street and be a part of that side of the Adams County Sheriff's Office.
Interesting. So it was like those connection points when they would come in, and I remember booking into Santa Rita Jail in California, outside the Bay Area, and having those good, building those relationships with those intake deputies. And what was it about that? What was it about those interactions that kind of lit that fire?
Well, one of the things that we had to do is, and I'm not real sure how they necessarily do it now, but we used to, as one of the booking deputies, I used to have to prepare all of the court paperwork to go over to the courthouse in the morning for the judge to sign. So I would have to read through all of those affidavits for arrest, but obviously if it wasn't with an arrest warrant. And most of the folks that came into the facility, I would say, in the upper 70s to 80% of those that were coming through the back door, most of those were warrantless arrest, affidavit arrest. So just starting to gain that knowledge and reading about the experiences that they were having, what they saw, their observations, and that just started kind of fueling those juices. And then, like you said, there were, especially when I was working graves, and you had a large influx of officers and deputies that were coming into the facility, you'd start to see some of the same ones on because we worked, either A side or B side of the week, right? Either Sunday through Wednesday or Wednesday through Saturday, and they did too. So you started to see some of those same people, just like you were talking about, building up relationships with them and just, starting to chat with them about, what it's like being out there and doing what they're doing. And a lot of times they'd encourage you, hey man, when you get a chance, you need to, I'd love to see you out on the road and, just building those relationships, which
Yeah,
I
you
just,
reading, yeah, it's everything, right? And you're reading those stories written out in great detail because they have to be, right? They have to, you know, show this probable cause. They have to show the experience. What was I thinking? What was I feeling? What happened? A to Z. And yeah, I can imagine it was like reading little power pack short stories that are just fueling this energy for me to get out there. And I want to have some of these my own experiences like this.
right, right, yep.
What was the journey to that? At what point did you go and make that transfer over to patrol?
Yeah, so it was actually, not that anybody was counting, but it was 2 years and 4 months from the day I started until I got my opportunity to go to patrol. So yeah, as soon as I could test, I tested and went out with that first group. Um, kind of a funny aside to all of that. At the time in the state of Colorado, I was able to move from the jail as a deputy. I wasn't certified, but I had 1 year once I left the jail to get certified. So I I leave the jail, I go to the road, go to patrol, I work patrol, get out of the FTO program, or and now I'm working on my own. And then my academy date came up, and then I went off the road, went through the academy, and then back to the road.
Whoa,
So it was
that's
it was
crazy.
crazy. It was absolutely insane.
So you're working with just some field training, not through an academy. So you really don't have, you're just getting field experience, not like the technical background experience that an academy teaches you. How long did that last before your academy date comes up?
It was about 9 months because they had to do it within a year. But I
Okay,
had been so through through my FTO program and then about 6 months on my own before I went to the academy. I will tell you that it made the academy a lot easier
sure,
because they would be talking about this is, this is what third degree assault is. So it was like, I can't tell you how many people I've arrested for third degree assault and domestic violence, right? I got that. So yeah, it was, it was a lot easier to get through the academy, I would imagine, than if I would have just gone through the academy without that experience.
sure. What do you think was so there was benefit to doing that way. What was the negative of doing it that way, do you think?
Well, if I think it all goes back to the FTO program. If that
Mm,
FTO program didn't set you up for success, um, that could be very detrimental. And I was pretty fortunate because I had some pretty good FTOs when I went through it. I did for one of the phases have an FTO that should have never been an FTO, right? Just like we have those sergeants and those commanders that should have never been in those positions. This guy should have never been an FTO, but you know, I had enough folks that I had already built a relationship with down there that got me through that FTO program. And then really there was we were so short staffed and small just like everybody is
yeah,
that just those other team members doing everything that they could just to help you be successful, right?
yeah.
I'm in such a tight knit team.
Yeah, well, it's what you wanted, right? When you
Oh
were
yeah.
thinking about like, what do I want? I want this tight knit team. What was it about that FTO? Like, what was I again? I was fortunate. I think I've talked about this. I was fortunate to have some great FTOs. Three incredible FTOs when I was in the coming out of the CHP Academy, breaking in Hayward, California. Awesome. Like, still connect with them, and then when I went and lateraled over to Vacaville, I had some great FTOs there as well. And what was it about that? For FTOs out there, and I talk to them all the time. What was it about that guy that didn't work that people can be aware of in themselves? That um,
I would say, you would see deputies that had been when you get to that 7 year, you start to get really sarcastic, really cynical. Everybody's out to get you. The administration sucks. All of these dirt bags that we deal with, and that really us versus them mentality. Well, it was in spades with this guy.
yeah,
All of that was there. Treated anybody that would even say, good afternoon, officer, or good evening, officer, and he would have some crude comment that would go back. He was just a horrible representation, of law enforcement overall. But for our community, this is the guy that's representing the sheriff's office in our community. Just one of those that you'll learn a lot from as to who you don't want to be when you get there, right?
It's so common that you hear this about the cynicism and the us versus them. And, so much of that I understand now to be, really that stress load that's building on them, right? And if they had the tools to reset some of that, and just that noise that just keeps spiraling in there, and that weight that, weighs so heavy on them, can be lifted, boy, so many more would be happier in the job that they're doing, and excited to go out there and represent the community in a different way, represent the department in a different way. Um, when you got off of FTO and you went out there and started working, um, talk about that time between, okay, I'm a deputy, I'm working. How long before you started to say, you know what, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring and I'm going to keep kind of moving up?
Yeah, where I was working, where I spent most of my time in patrol, very, very busy, very active, fairly violent. Um, you know, some harder areas of the county, right, that I was working in. So you're constantly going on death scenes, you're going on stabbings and shootings, and so you're learning a lot very, very quickly as you're going through that. So in my mind, that starts to accelerate your opportunity for growth if you take advantage of that, because you got to see a lot within really even within before I even got to the academy. I got to see a lot, and then coming out of the academy. So then when I looked at a development perspective and watched most of those that I gravitated to, whether they were work friends or people that I hung out with, kind of the natural progression for most of us at that time was to go into investigations.
Yeah.
And so that was my desire. So I ended up working um, for about 4 years on the street before I tested for investigations. And it was about a year before I actually went into investigations. We also had a change in administrations during that time. So I was on a list. That list died when the new sheriff came in. They started another process. And so, yeah, but it was that 3.5, 4 years in that environment that I was working in that I felt very confident in my skills and abilities as a patrol deputy, and really wanted to take that next step and go into investigations.
And what part of investigations did you go in? Did they have specific divisions? And what did you do there?
Yeah, most everybody at that time would start in property. And so
Okay.
I worked property for about a year, and then I got tapped on the shoulder to go into the child side of persons.
Mm,
So I was working any kid crimes, whether it was sexual assault or just assault, up into and including the death of a child, and that ran all of the way to adults, to 18-year-olds. So if it was a 17-year-old that was killed, murdered, which there were a couple, I was one that would investigate those types of crimes.
you have kids at the time?
I did. Yeah. Yeah. I
How
had my
was
I had my first one. Let's see, I'd been at the jail for about a year, so just a year into my career. And then the second one was I'd been on the street for 3 years.
okay?
So yeah.
So you had a young one and one that was 6 to 8, maybe years old at that time. And how did that affect the way you did your job? I mean, that had to have been heavy in many cases.
It was working kid crimes with little ones. There'd just be times you go home and just grab your kid, give him a hug, sit with him for a little bit. It'd be like, okay, Dad, what's
Right.
going on here? But you see the way people, you know, I, when you go back to like that one FTO, you can start to see how people can start to drift that way when when that's all you're dealing with, especially if you start to lose contact with anybody outside of law enforcement. So, like this guy had gone through a divorce, so all of his contacts are all within law enforcement. So you're either a cop or you're a bad person, period.
It exacerbates that compassion fatigue that is so it plagues so many people because it's just like it's this or this, it's black and white, and they lose that connection point to something outside of that. And interesting. Yeah, you can definitely, and this is one of those things I talk about being aware of that drift. You mentioned it, right? You can see that drift early on. How do we get in front of that
Right,
drift,
right.
right? Not wait for that divorce and that critical incident to happen, that complaint that came in, but no, let's get in front of it so that we can affect our fellow teammates in a more impactful and meaningful way, and maybe protect them from that drift.
Yeah, yeah. And it was, you start to see other people that you work with start to go through that. Um, and nobody at that time, I mean, we're talking mid 90s. Nobody talked about it.
Yeah, no.
But you knew how they were dealing with it. Most of which was through the bottle.
Yeah.
Um,
30 years later, Michael, we're still dealing with it. 30
I
years later,
know, right?
dealing with that,
Yep,
right?
yep.
So, I mean, that's a big, you know, light bulb moment here, friends who are listening to this. Like, we have to be the influence of change. We have to step up and be those leaders that lead where their 2 feet stand, whether you got 2 weeks on the job or 2 weeks till retirement. You have to step up and look out for those people around you, and start talking about these things, and remove that taboo conversation, because it could save not only the people that are around you, but ultimately yourself one day.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. Because there are, as you know, there are a lot of warning signs that are out there,
Yeah,
and people see them all the time, but they don't intervene. They don't do anything about it. They just like, Joe's going through a rough spell. He's a resilient dude. He'll get through it.
right,
Instead of saying, "Hey, Joe, looks like you're going through a rough spell.
right.
What can we go out and get a cup of coffee? Can we go out and let's just talk." If we acted on what it is that we're seeing, we would be able to take care of each other a lot better.
Yeah,
Because we'll do it if it's a tactical situation on the street.
right,
I mean, we're there to back up our partners, no questions asked.
right.
But but when it gets to those feelings, that those emotional things, that's when there's that drawback, and that he'll be all
Yeah,
right.
yeah, and I think it's one of the reasons why I I call my program tactical resilience. Like, we have to view these things as tactical, just
Mhm.
like you would that tactic that keeps your partner safe out there. You have to view the conversation as a tactical conversation. And it's not for vulnerability's sake with therapy language, but it is structured in a way that you can pull some truth out of there and get in front of these signs that you might be seeing in a useful way, like not to make anybody feel a type of way, but to really be a tactical advantage for your partner, for your teammate, for that person you work with, or your family member for that matter.
Yeah.
um, What was it like in that unit as an investigator? How long did you do that? And what were some insights that you got from that type of work that were different than the patrol and the being in the jail?
Yeah, there were three of us that were in that unit. There were, when I first went into it, um, two gals and myself, and then one of the gals got promoted, and then it was two guys and two of us guys and one of the gals. Very, very close team. Um, Very open team when it came to what cases we were dealing with. Really leaned on each other when it came to direction as to where we should go, what we should do. But also we knew each other's families. And I don't know that we ever really hung out outside of work, but our families were very invested in their families as far as that check in and, how you doing? And, this is what I was dealing with last night. You'll never believe what happened kind of thing. So, um, very blessed to have that type of a group to be able to bounce those things off of. Even to the point it was like that was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that, and this is how that hit me. Um, I, I was not afraid, and they were not afraid for us to share that information back and forth. We had an office, but it was an office that was big enough that it had three desks and three chairs and enough space where we could move around. But it gave us that opportunity to have those conversations that I think really helped certainly keep me grounded as we walk through those things, because what we would investigate, um, you know, I used to kid a little bit that it's just not normal to have to talk to a 4-year-old about their sex life, right? Those aren't conversations, but we were having them every day. That information is coming in, and so it was good to have a group like that kind of we could bounce things off of, and there's always also that cop humor, and but yeah, that was a time that I really value because there was a lot of growth for me as somebody that has been in this career now for 39 years. um, there's a foundation that was set there as to how I was going to approach things moving forward. Because a lot of times when you're on patrol, you respond to some pretty horrific stuff, but you're in and you're out. And you're not necessarily following up with the victims, or with the victims' families. You're not having to go to court with them. You're not having to, to really start to share in some of those follow-up investigations and the things that could have been done. And because, as a patrolman, I responded to it. I secured the crime scene. I called in the investigators. They're the ones that deal with those things a lot longer. So that taught me a lot um, about how to just kind of work through those things and process those things. And, again, blessed that I had people around me that there was nothing that was off the table when it came to conversations.
It's incredible. How did that shape when you then, went to sergeant, lieutenant, and I want to hold off on to captain because I remember you telling me a great story um, about being talked about or talked to and shifting something in yourself about getting into that captain role, but in that, you know, patrol supervision and lieutenant, which I think is such a critical role in law enforcement because they really have communication lines up and down rank. How did that experience, all of this experience leading up to it, how did that inform how you were a supervisor and how you led there?
I just, the, the appreciation and the value that I had in that relationship, in investigations, and not just with those two, but, all of investigations, extremely tight team. Because when we would get a homicide, it didn't matter if you were property or persons, you were probably out on that case. You may not be the lead, but you're out on that case, to help do some of those ancillary duties. Um, but I wanted to be able to bring that with me, when I promoted, when I promoted to sergeant, I wanted to create that environment or that culture where we could have those conversations, where we're building a tight knit team. It's not afraid to start having some of those conversations. And kind of going back to, the start of my career, really understanding how to read people. And when you learn how to read people, one of the things that is so important about that is listening. Um, and I really picked the listening thing up when I was in investigations, because I had been taught by a couple of really good interviewers. And what I found out about those good interviewers is they didn't miss what was coming out of that person that they were interviewing, the suspect's mouth, and where they might pause, and Reed teaches a lot of that, right? Those interview and interrogation techniques. And I had the opportunity early on to watch a couple of different investigators. One who had to, they write down all of the questions that they were going to ask, and they had to get through that list. How many times that shut the suspect up from talking because they had to ask the next question on their list, because they weren't listening to what the suspect was saying. They're
Right.
just trying to get through this list.
Sure.
And I really learned how to listen well, so that I was picking up those things that you might miss when you're just trying to go to the next thing that's on the list. That's
Think-
really what helped me formulate my questions, was
Yeah.
intently listening to what they're saying. And that also helped as a supervisor, right? Am I just saying, come into my office, let's have a conversation. Hey, what's going on? And I'm over here and I'm, typing away and I'm not even really listening. But I think that I'm showing great value in this employee because I let them come into my office and vent, and that's so I took that with me when I went into my leadership role, my first sergeant's position. Just wanted that type of person.
What a huge gift you just gave, right? This really insight into listening. And I think that there's I can see the disconnect there because I worked patrol and was also an FTO and I did interview and interrogation training and had thousands of interviews that I did. This is a huge gift. Anybody out there that's listening, Michael just dropped a bomb for you. And I think that there's such uh, a the pattern in patrol is next task, next task. Let's get through this task. Let's go on to the next. Let's put a bow on it and on to the next. Whereas you had the agency in investigations to do was sit back, and time was not against you. And so if you're in patrol hearing this, you have to sort of weigh that balance of time and capacity to listen. But as you get up into that supervisory role, you have to make that mental adjustment that, hey, I need to lean more into the listening as opposed to the next task, next task, next task,
Yeah.
so that I can be more valuable, more useful to the team as a whole. And they're going to do those tasks, and I'm going to help guide them because I was open to listen. Huge. That's huge, man. And I think like so many people get caught as they go up that rank, they still get they just fall back on that task mentality and they don't make those subtle adjustments.
Yeah.
Um, why do you think that is? Why do you think that they don't make those subtle adjustments? I mean, we've talked a little bit about this kind of stuff before, but what do you think? I guess what pushed you to make that adjustment? You had to do it in investigation, so you had that wisdom of experience. But yeah, why do you think that others don't make that connection?
I some of it I think you learn a lot from those that have gone before you, right? And I see this in leadership. I saw it a lot when I was going through the ranks. You know, we look at those that are going before us as to how they got there. What do they do? Well, they've been successful. It's odd that they've been successful, but they've been successful. I guess that's the way that you do it, or that's the way that you do it here. That's kind of the culture. And we drive that into patrol officers all the time. Get in, get out. There's another call on that board that you need to get to, or we're so scared to get too tied up because we want to be available for the big one because that's the one that we want to go on, right?
Right.
We want to be there with everybody else when they're on the big one so that we can have those stories to tell later on about what we were doing and how we contributed to that big call. And so there's just this pressure on us constantly in law enforcement that we've just got to get on to the next thing. And when you're in that mode, um, taking time to listen it's just, I mean, it can be a time suck, but you have to decide, is this something that I need to listen to? What's the value in that? And when you start to value your people, and value them more than that next project, that's when it becomes that's what your people want in a leader, right? Is somebody who doesn't say that they care for you, but they demonstrate that they care for you because they will take the time to get involved and to listen and to know what they need. Because it's not the same as their district partner. Their needs are not the same as their district partner's needs. And I've got to know both, right? And then the next district over and the next district over. It's
Sure. Yeah.
if to do it and to do it well takes it takes a lot of sacrifice. It takes a lot of work, but that's what we need in our leaders.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a quality that came through in a story that you told me about listening and about that ascension through the ranks that you had when you were, and correct me if this is wrong, but I think you were like interested in a captain position that was coming open, and you talked to the person that was going to be hiring that position, and they said, I'm thinking about going outside. And I want you to tell that story because I think it demonstrates your ability to listen and your humble attitude towards the feedback that you got, which is why you ended up at that the upper echelon of being a sheriff. But tell that story again. I think it's very useful.
Yeah, so I'm a lieutenant. I'm in the patrol division at the time, and I know that there's one of the captains getting ready to retire. In fact, he was getting ready to retire from investigations. One of the guys that I highly looked up to, thought the world of him. Just a great leader in our organization. And the sheriff had come down, and we were standing there, and we got engaged in conversation. And at the time, I was pretty close to the sheriff. We had been in the organization. He had been there much longer than I had, but he had been my sergeant at one point. He was my SWAT team commander. He was so he was a lot of things to me, and was really kind of one of the guys that I also looked up to was the sheriff at the time, and he's starting to talk about this captain that he's going to be losing soon, and I'm thinking that we're probably going to start getting into, well, what are you thinking, boss? Who's on the top of the list there that you're thinking about promoting to that position? And so we start kind of talking about it a little bit, and he just, he started shaking his head a little bit, and he said, I think I'm going to have to go outside for, to replace this position. And it just floored me because the lieutenants would get promoted to captains. That was the rank structure at the time. And I said, you don't think that there's anybody internally within the organization that you can put in that position? And he said, I don't think anybody's ready. And I said, which
Like,
I think just because we had been, I had a great relationship with him. I was like, what about, where am I at in all of this? And he said, I don't even know what you do. And that floored me because first, the first thought that went through my head, I was like, you're the sheriff now and you don't know what your patrol lieutenants do? You were a patrol lieutenant, and this is going on in my head. I didn't say any of this. I'm thinking, you don't know what I do? That's, are you that out of touch now that now that you're the sheriff? But what I did say was, you're going to have to explain what that means because I don't understand. When you say you don't know what I do, what does that mean? And what he was telling me was, I've not shown or demonstrated that I'm ready to take that next step. I've not shown or demonstrated that I'm involved in the things that a captain needs to be involved in. And it was a great moment for me because that wasn't my mindset. And it's so funny because I tell people this all the time. My mindset was not to be thinking and acting and demonstrating that I had that I was a captain. My mind, I'm a lieutenant. I'm staying in my lane. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. But so much so that I didn't think as a captain. I didn't understand the dynamics. I was highly respected as a patrol lieutenant, highly respected in the patrol division, but I didn't really know what was going on in the organization. I didn't know outside of what I needed to know as a lieutenant what was going on in the communities. I didn't, and basically he was saying, you need to start getting out there and start watching what captains do and start acting like a captain if you want to attain that next rank. Especially when you're talking about those are huge jumps, right? From sergeant to lieutenant is a huge jump. From lieutenant to captain, captain to chief. Those are huge jumps, completely different responsibilities, and it is so prevalent in law enforcement that you're a really good lieutenant. That doesn't equate to you're going to be a really good captain, or that you're even ready to be a captain. Because they're different roles. And so many times that lieutenant gets promoted to captain and does their job just the same way that they did as a lieutenant, and that's not their role, right? And they're not understanding why they're struggling in this new position. I was a really good lieutenant. I'm struggling as a captain. I was a really good sergeant. I'm struggling as a lieutenant, and that's because mentally they've not made that shift.
Yeah.
That comment and that mindset shift, and then the comment that I heard had gone, me and that same sheriff about a year and a half later, I'm running training, and me and that same sheriff had gone to hear Jack Inter speak about organizational challenge. And he said, and it just absolutely blew me away, that 75 to 80% of officers that leave an organization are leaving because of their immediate supervisor. And I was thinking to myself, that's got to change. That
Yeah.
has got to, we cannot put people in supervisory positions that are pushing out our people. And I started thinking about it. And there was one time in my career with the Adams County Sheriff's Office that I wanted to leave. And it was because I had a sergeant that I was working for that had no business being a sergeant. And it was horrible. It was horrible going to work every night. I hated going to work. So I started looking at other organizations.
What did you do in that situation? I think it's, look, I love it. You're cooking, man. You're cooking because this is stuff that people need to hear, and they need to know that whether you're patrol officer, sergeant, lieutenant, think up and down rank, get educated up and down rank, get an awareness of what's happening up and down rank so that you can be more effective in the place that you're at. But I think so many people are in that place where they have that immediate supervisor who they don't connect with well, who they don't believe is leadership qualified. And they're struggling with it. What did you do in that moment where you didn't leave that department? You somehow got through it. What did you do?
Um, well, I had a change in supervision, so I mean I don't know that there was anything specifically that I did. I don't know what would have happened had I still had to continue to work for that sergeant. Um, that sergeant ended up going into a different role when the new sheriff came in,
Mm-hmm.
because the new sheriff saw that sergeant had no business being a sergeant. So I was fortunate there, and I was fortunate that I didn't leave. Yeah, it was difficult going to work every night. It was, I had conversations with my wife about even getting out of law enforcement completely.
Interesting. Do
Yeah,
you think that, so I think like if we're circling back on, extreme ownership and sort of the mentality there, it's like build relationship. Like build relationship with that person so that you have an understanding of it, of what their thought process is, and maybe you can step in and be a little bit of an influence in
yeah,
that.
yeah,
And if you've built that relationship, look, you don't have to agree on everything, but you can always question that person when they're making a decision that you don't believe in because you've built that trust uh, capacity there, because you've built the relationship. Do you think that that would have been, an angle to take with that particular type of sergeant?
yeah. I mean, knowing after years of experience, I would have handled that differently
Mm-hmm.
then, than I did at the time. And it is because I've kind of gone through that, and I've developed ways to be able to deal with those that maybe are not the best choice to be in a position, but they're in that position. And so there there were other times in my career that I worked for people that they weren't as bad as that sergeant, but they weren't good. But I was able to, like you said, develop that relationship and that rapport, just kind of understand maybe where they were coming from, and even where I could help, uh, you know, strengthen or shore up that sergeant or that lieutenant or
Yeah.
along the way.
think that's huge. I think like, I try to make this type of podcast both a little bit of storytelling, but then also practical. And I think that idea, even in it's just an idea, but it's practical in the sense that if I take this idea of understanding where they're coming from, understanding their challenges, and stepping in the gap there, as opposed to just talking about the bullshit gap that's there, but I can step in that gap and I can do something. And hopefully, I'm working on myself enough to have the capacity to do that, as opposed to just getting sucked down the toilet hole, toilet bowl of complaining and negativity. No, I can be the influencer here. I can step in the gap there. I can shore up those places that are lacking, and I can do something about my own experience. I have agency over that. I think that's huge.
Yeah, and I think kind of going to your point, there are a lot of informal leaders that rise that team in spite of their leader,
Yeah,
just because that they're like, well, we're going to do everything we can to still make the boss look good,
sure.
be, because they've got that mentality that, it's for the betterment of this entire team for us to step up and do everything that we can to, to kind of shore it up, or lift those boats,
Yeah,
as high.
rising tide lifts all ships, right?
Right.
I mean, it's that mentality, and you become known as the ship that gets after it, and not the ship that is, midday bullshit talking about, you know, the agency and the admin and the leadership in this, and complaining about every little thing, any policy change, any, lack of training or weapons thing that comes up. We all know those shifts. We all know those people that influence that, and it brings the whole experience down. So if you
Yeah.
can change that, you can be the light in that situation. You can be the go-getter, the hard charger that's going to influence instead of being influenced in a positive way, despite the challenges. That's resilience, man. That's like influence. That's what will again rise the tide and lift all those ships. And so, man, I appreciate that. Those insights. Uh, let's talk about the top, right? Let's talk about that mentality and the difference in leading from the top, right? You became Adams County Sheriff, and so you've seen that, you've experienced that. What would be beneficial for a patrolman, a patrolwoman, a supervisor, somebody in down rank? What would be useful for them to know about that position?
There's when in law enforcement, when it comes to the CEO, there's no other position like that one, because that's an elected position for 62 of the 64 counties in Colorado. The sheriff in Denver, in the city county of Denver, is appointed by the city manager. But all of the other counties, the city and county of Broomfield, the police chief also acts as the sheriff. So the police chief is appointed by the city manager. All of the other counties are elected. There's no other position in law enforcement like the sheriff's position because of that. The sheriff doesn't report to a particular person. They report to the community that they serve. And there's when you look at the root of that, that's the way, in my opinion, that's the way that it should be, right? Because we get our authority to enforce laws from the community, right? I mean, they're the ones that give us the opportunity to do that, and it should be the community that elects that person into that position. When it comes to law enforcement, the community should drive what law enforcement should look like in their community. Um, so with that, it means that depending upon the type of person that you are, you either have to build a great team around you or you're going to be out on an island all by yourself. Um, and maybe you've got some other sheriffs in neighboring counties that you can have conversations with that that might help you, but that's still not going to help your leadership within your organization. So I had the opportunity to watch at the time it was I came in under camp and this year DAR. So I had worked for three different sheriffs over the time before I became the sheriff. And all three of those men had different styles. All three of those men brought great attributes to the office, and one had some things that he brought to the office that were questionable. The other two, you know, they had, I would say, different areas of focus, um, and and brought the organization to the next level each time, and I really appreciated that about them. So what I tried to do, growing up in that organization and knowing most of the people that were working in the organization at the time that I became the sheriff, was to take the good things that I knew about those men and incorporate those into the way that I led. Um, but I think that a lot of it boils down to you have to remember and take care of your greatest asset. And the greatest asset in any organization are the people that work for that organization. And so I wanted to make sure that I didn't stand in the way of enhancing any type of employee development, whether that was personal or professional. I wanted to build good, strong, resilient teams throughout the organization. And I knew that I had to make sure that I had the right leaders in the right positions. Um, and for the most part, you also have to kind of take what you have,
Yeah, right.
and then decide where they're going to be. The only position that um, I I was kind of this guy is my undersheriff. He was a commander at the time, so he jumped um, a rank to get to the undersheriff position. But I had to have somebody there that I knew unequivocally was going to have my back, that I knew that was going to tell me the good, the bad, and the ugly, um, and was still going to have my back. And that's the two of us are the ones that kind of then decided who the chiefs were going to be. And if they were a chief before I got there, they remained a chief. They were just working in different divisions, and that was based on where we wanted to go and what we thought was going to be best for the organization and the leadership in the organization. And
I
then,
think it's huge what you just said of telling you put somebody in place right below you that was willing to tell you the good, the bad, the ugly. They weren't just a yes man or yes woman that was going to come in there and say, "Oh, yep, sheriff, like that's it. Let's go." And they were willing to push back, and I think that's so critical. Where and oftentimes I believe that leaders, and I've seen this not only in law enforcement, but in the corporate space, they promote or they bring people around them that aren't willing to do that, that aren't willing to stand where their 2 feet,
yeah,
lead where their 2 feet stand and push back on some of the things. How did you deal with that when the people who elected you were maybe pushing back on some of your ideas, and you didn't. Obviously, there's times where you have to put them first, and the organization, not necessarily second, but you can't have everything, right? You
Right.
gotta you gotta drop one ball. Like, how did you deal with those big decisions like that?
Yeah, it's interesting because, when you go back and you look at those that elected you, um, you quickly realize that it's not much more than 50%, of the people that voted,
Yeah,
voted for, one particular person, right? Those splits usually are,
pretty
they're
close.
never 100.
Yeah.
They're never, so it's one of those that you kind of have to go with what's best for the community as a whole, what's best for the organization. And when you're looking at the vision for the organization and the vision and the things that you want to be able to accomplish, that's kind of where your decision making comes in. And so we created kind of this mission, um, and it was unity through trust and trust through connection. So
Mm,
what I wanted to be able to do, because of the time period in which we were walking through, that that unity was fractured. Um, we had when the race first kicked off, because the sheriff that I replaced was term limited. When the race first kicked off, there were four internal candidates and one external candidate. And with four internal candidates, it really starts to divide and split the organization. So, and then you go through a primary, and then it's down to two candidates, both of which are still in the organization. So it's, people would get in whoever's camp, and that's where they would be. Um, one of the one of the things that I had decided to do when I first took office was make sure that I brought everybody together in the organization and said, don't care whose camp you were in. That's neither here nor there. This is uh, there. For the lack of a better term, there's a new sheriff in town, um, and um, this is the direction that I want to go. This is
future.
what I want the agency to be, and just asking you all to move in that direction. And if you can't, um, you're certainly not going to be in a leadership role. And I will give you a good reference if you can't work for me. I'll give you a good reference, and you can go work for somebody else.
A good rocks kicking reference.
Right. But and to me that went back to, I can remember, sitting in briefings and graveyards and listening to the sergeant just, you know, run the agency into the ground and
Yeah.
the administration into the ground. And what is that doing for us that are sitting in that briefing? And it just caused that disunity, for a couple of particular sheriffs. It wasn't too bad with the last sheriff, but it that I I got all the sergeants together and I said, "You're all on probation for 6 months. Um, here's kind of the expectations for sergeant. You can't run this agency into the ground. You have to ride for the brand. You have to be all in on Adams County. We have to move this ship forward. And if you can't, you can be a deputy. You just let me know where you want to be a deputy, and I'll make you a deputy sheriff. But You do not get to be in supervision if you cannot get on board with where it is that this agency wants to go.
I think that what you said, that unity through trust, trust through connection,
Connection.
working backwards from that in that scenario, those briefing rooms are the first line of connection. And if that connection is broken, well, then the trust begins to become fragile, and then there's no unity, right? It breaks. So working backwards, you had a good thought there, was to like, hey, let's hit this at the core. Let's get it at the source and provide that connection, then the trust, which builds a unity from the core.
Yeah.
And I love it, man. It's taking that experience. You're now working for a different county as a division chief. What's your vision now? How has all of this experience that we talked about shaped what your vision is now for where you work?
Yeah, a lot of it goes back to that comment that Jack Enter made, you know, that and it's I don't remember what the last statistic I saw, and it's not just law enforcement, but it's employee organizations wide. People leave their organization because of their bosses, not because they're underpaid. I mean, some do, but most of the time, people leave bosses. They don't leave organizations. Is kind of the in my drive, my vision has not wavered from I don't want that to be the case for me, but now it's how do I help law enforcement organizations make sure it's not the case for them? So building this leadership development program, I am when I decide to, to hang it up here in Douglas County, that's all I'm going to do full time is help law enforcement agencies build their leaders so that folks are not leaving their organizations. We're so blessed down here because we've got some really, really good leaders in this organization. And we have people that are lined up at the door wanting to come in and work for the Douglas County Sheriff's Office because we have a really good reputation. And that's because we take care of our people. If you take care of your people, you're going to have people that want to come and work for you. If you create a good vision, and you have explainable, clear expectations, when you boil it down, people want to be a part of something that's bigger than themselves. They want to go shoulder to shoulder with something and have this accomplishment that they couldn't have done on their own, but man, together we're going to be able to accomplish this. That's that's what gets people to come to work at 9 o'clock at night and work until 6 o'clock in the morning, right? It's because that's not necessarily a fun shift to work, but man, if you can give them that sense of purpose and make sure that you're fulfilling their why, that you're going to get people that want to work with you and for you all day long. And it goes back to that listening conversation, right? You got to listen
Yeah.
because my why is different than yours, and your why is different than the guy sitting next to you at the briefing table. And I have to know what those are so that I can make sure that we're doing what we can as an organization to fulfill those
I
whys.
think that comes down to just what you said, those personal relationships. Because when you can fuel somebody's why, and when your why is big enough, the how is easy. The great Jim Rohn said that. It's one of my favorite quotes. And you can get all those whys together, moving in the same direction. I think it's huge. Talk a little bit about, as we wrap here, the program that you created, the leadership organization development program that you created, and how can somebody take advantage of that even now?
Yeah, so I started in 2019, right after I left Adams County. I started the integrity leadership development. And with that goal of preparing leaders to take on the next role. Over the years, we've been able to, I'm working full time, and so over the years we've been tinkering with it, and getting it headed in a direction to where now we can offer agencies, we can also offer individuals, whether it's coaching or mentoring, and I do a lot of that internally within the organization. We were talking about a promotional process right before we jumped on this, that our guys are going through right now. And it's great to sit down with those that want to be sergeants and those that want to be commanders and really get their mindset in the right place so that they're successful moving forward. And they kind of understand what it is that they're getting into, because sometimes they don't know. Um, so yeah, we offer those consulting, those mentoring, and we even teach leadership classes. Uh, and at the end of the day, one of the primary goals is to develop a leadership culture within the organization, so that I can come in and I can set a leadership development program. I can teach mentors on how to take that program and continue that program, so that internally they can develop their own folks, uh, after kind of going through that train the trainer, if you will. And I think that that's so important, because most agencies don't have the time to sit down and develop a program. And then where are they going to get those folks to administer the program? Well, if you now get somebody that can bring a program in, can teach 7 or 8 folks within the organization that can move that program forward, then it starts to become a culture within the organization, as this is how we develop our leaders, so that every time we have a promotional process, we've got folks that are on the bench that are really ready to go. I would say that a lot of organizations don't have a lot of bench strength. Um, and
Right.
and sometimes they have people that came off the bench that weren't ready to come off the bench, but out of necessity, we brought them off the bench and we put them in that spot. And organizations are really good about sending folks out to different supervisory schools. But how are they taking what it is that they learned and applying it within the organization? How does what they learned work within their organization? And I think that that's the key to what it is that I'm getting into. It's not a one size fits all. I go into the agency, I meet with the leaders in the organization, and I then through that process get to understand what's important to that organization and what the expectation of the leaders are at every level. And then I teach their staff to be able to teach that out, give them much like what you did, give them the material, so that they have that to guide them as they move forward.
It's huge. I think, man, I commend you for doing it. It is a big gap, and we've talked about this gap. It's a huge gap in leadership, right?
Yeah,
Management, there's supervision, but there's this gap to how do you take some of those skills and really apply it into leadership, where you're leading others to be the best version of themselves. And I love that you're taking that experience that we kind of talked through over the last hour and a half, and you're now applying it to the next generation of people that are coming up in these moments, and have their place to shine, and doing that in a way that is going to illuminate those around them. So, man, Michael, I so appreciate it. And Where can tell the website? It's integrity development or leadership development. What's the website that somebody could reach out to you, or how do they get in touch with you if they want to?
Yeah, so I do a podcast like you had mentioned earlier on, and that's Elevate Your Call to Service podcast. And you can find that on anywhere that you get your, you download your podcast from. And then I've got a integrityleaders.net is the website for getting in contact with me, or like you said, I'm on LinkedIn. Michael McIntosh, there on LinkedIn. So yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whichever way you can get in touch with Michael, reach out, have that conversation. If you feel like his experience could be useful to your organization, bring him in, talk to him about it. I know from my conversations, it's been valuable just in the short time that we've been able to get to know each other. And friends, if you're interested in, what I have to do as well, you want to build a resilient team so that they can have the capacity to bring forth those leadership qualities that Michael's talking about, that we just heard were through that entire career. Build resilience into your team, build better decision making, better reaction time, better access to emotional intelligence through bringing in a system like ORSM, the Operational Reset Stack method, which I teach in my Tactical Resilience workshop. If you're interested in that, reach out to me, joeswansontactical.com. Get in touch with me on Instagram, Joe Swanson Tactical. And thank you for listening. I appreciate that. Every listen here to the podcast helps us share these messages of resilience and leadership, and it can benefit another person out there. So share it with a friend, keep checking in, and remember, enjoy your right now and stay sharp. I'll talk to you in the next episode, friends. Thank you, Michael.
Hey, you bet.